Kafka, the hot antagonist that has brought many Sims to their knees. She's known for her mysterious nature, her mind games, and her selfies. She has a deep, secret history with the Trailblazer, and she's incapable of feeling fear like everybody from her ruined home planet. And it's highly likely that she's very sick, or turning into a bug monster. Let me explain. Special credits to my friends Stella and Mari because this theory is the brainchild of all three of us and likely wouldn't exist if not for our obscene theory cooking session that one time. Okay, now, this theory started because I was watching Kafka's trailer in 0.25 speed, as I do, don't question it. Hoyo really likes hiding special images in flickers, and that's kind of where this started. In Kafka's trailer, there are a few points with notable flickering imagery. First is the scene at 15 seconds, which I'll show you now. Generally speaking, the text "What do you see?" and the pictures are alluding to the optical illusion psychology test, known as the Rorschach inkblot tests. They're inherently up to interpretation, but there is one that exists for 2 frames that looks distinctly familiar. It looks like Tazzyronth, the Propagation. Now, this got us wondering what on earth was Tazzyronth of all things doing in Kafka's trailer, and is hidden teasing flickers no less. And so we began investigating both Kafka and Tazzyronth, and we found some interesting information. Firstly, Tazzyronth may partially resemble a spider, but they're technically supposed to be a coleoptera, so a beetle and not an arachnid. The spider pattern on Kafka's jacket does seem to resemble the spider-like portion of Tazzyronth, so it's likely that the bug versus arachnid thing probably isn't really that big of a deal, because Hoyo is most likely just lumping all insects under the one umbrella, including spiders. Still, it is a small hurdle in the investigation, so we switched it up and started looking at this more from Kafka's side. So, for those who don't know, Kafka is actually not an original character to Honkai Star Rail. Kafka has appeared previously in Honkai Impact 3rd as a stigmata called Kafka, Loner of Prague. This stigmata is actually based off of a real person called Franz Kafka, who is famous for their short stories. Each stigmata is named after a different short story. Now, full disclosure, I've never read any of these short stories myself, so I'm only going off of the information that I've been able to garner from the Wikipedia articles. There's also an older thread by Kafka Daily that helped locate some of the information, which I will include in the description of this video. The stigmata subbonus is called K's Processing, referring to a short story whose protagonist is named K, the castle. This novel was actually incomplete and published against his wishes after Kafka's untimely death from tuberculosis. The first Kafka stigmata is called Contemplation, referencing the novel of the same name. It's a collection of short stories in Kafka's first publication. There are 3 in this collection that I found the most interesting: Passersby, On the Tram, and Clothes. Passersby is about 2 men in a chase, and how the way you perceive the context of their chase drastically changes your opinion of the men. Note that Blade's relic set is called Passersby of Wandering Clouds. On the Tram could be a reference to the Astral Express itself, as the protagonist wonders about their purpose in the world. Clothes stuck out to me because of that one detail about Kafka's personality where she values beautiful jackets. Clothes contemplates the value of a woman's outfit versus her personality and ultimately concludes that beautiful clothing cannot mask a worthless personality. One other small detail about this stigmata is that it features black birds. It could be a coincidence, but we do actually see Kafka with black birds in the Japella Rebellion Myriad trailer. Also note that Kafka's name actually means jackdaw, which is a type of blackbird. The second stigmata, just like the set bonus, is a reference to the castle. As previously mentioned, this was Kafka's last novel. The only thing I could find in this novel was the name drop of a character named Otto, which was interesting but most likely unrelated. The juicy parts of this stigmata come from the picture itself. Firstly, on the table is a toy castle, an obvious allusion to the short story. Next is the black and white roses, which I believe could be a reference to Kafka's guns with the inscription Ivory and Ebony on their sides. In fact, that is also most likely referencing the entire aesthetic of the girl in the stigmata. And lastly is the curious presence of a bug on a book. A coleoptera bug, like Tazzyronth. Very, very interesting. Turns out this is referencing another work of Kafka's called Metamorphosis, which is usually printed with a coleoptera on the cover. This should ring alarm bells for those that have played the Swarm simulated universe, because Metamorphosis is the name of the primary debuff inflicted by the path of propagation. Not only that, but the databank says that Tazzyronth metamorphs into a self-duplicating horror, a torrent of infinite propagation. Very curious, as the protagonist of the book is known for ultimately transforming into a monster. So that's a second connection between Kafka and Tazzyronth. And while we're here, just to prove this isn't a coincidence, the background art of this entire set is also a Coleoptera. And also, while we are discussing the databank entry, it also tells us that Tazzyronth's path was ignited out of a desire born from loneliness. In this set, Kafka is called the Loner of Prague. This might be a coincidence, but given the rest of the context, I have my doubts. The final set is referring to the story Judgment. This is a story about a dispute between a father and son that ultimately results in the father condemning the son to death by drowning, and the son jumping off of a bridge and presumably dying. It should be noted that the son is named George, which, similar to Kay from the castle, is actually an alias of Kafka's. The visuals also show Kafka with another blackbird, likely a jackdaw, but this one has galactic wings. Kafka appears again in GGZ, this time as a sickly teenage girl living in Prague, who loves to write. As previously mentioned, Kafka's illness is likely a reference to how the real Franz Kafka was suffering from tuberculosis. GGZ Kafka's story also mimics that of the real Franz Kafka's experience finding a young girl in the park who had lost her doll. He wrote a letter from the doll that read, "Please do not mourn me. I have gone on a trip to see the world. I will write you of my adventures." He would then read her many more letters over time until eventually presenting her with a doll that looked different, with a letter explaining, "My travels have changed me." Years later, the girl found a note within the doll that read, in summary, "Everything that you love you will eventually lose, but in the end, love will return in a different form." Honestly, this reminds me of the way that Kafka hopes Trailblazer will remember her at the start of the story, as that loss seemed to have impacted her sincerely. In Kafka's companion mission, she tells us the truth. "You would eventually change me and I would change you. In other words, you and I are each other's destiny." To say nothing of the fact that the name of the companion mission, Letters from a Strange Woman, is actually a reference to the novel of the same name about a woman with a one-sided love for the protagonist, but I digress. So what does all of this actually mean? The short answer is that I don't really know exactly. The hypothesis that my friends and I came to is that Kafka in HSR is also likely very sick. She's not necessarily an author, but she does follow a script and is committed to the narrative. At some point, she should undergo a metamorphosis, probably at the hands of the Trailblazer. That likely turns her into some kind of monster, and then there may be a dispute between either her and her own family or between her and the Trailblazer, who's jokingly referred to as a child in one of her lies. Perhaps this dispute will result in Kafka jumping off a bridge, similar to how she jumped off the rails on the Xianzhou. It's hard to say with any certainty now, though. I do know, however, that whatever happens, she is connected to Tazzyronth. Tazzyronth is a dead Eon, but perhaps they are still somehow the source of her power, or the source of her illness. Hive minds are a common insect thing, and who knows, this might be alluding to her spirit whisper power. A few other small things of interest about Kafka is the section in her trailer that shows the words MacGuffin, nonlinear structure, and honoric structure. These are all narrative techniques that might give insight into how a story will play out. There's also the butterfly motif that appears on her jacket, as well as in the form of little black butterflies appearing on her skills. The icon on two of her stigmata also kind of looks like a cocoon to me, so... Anyway, this is all that I've managed to piece together at this point. If anyone has any additional ideas or thoughts, I'd really love to hear about them in the comments. I plan on making my next video about the Ouroboros, because I have some actually crazy theories related to it, connecting everything from Heliobi to even Baihung together. I'm also open to suggestions if anyone wants to hear about any other topics. I'm more than happy to at least consider them, just let me know in the comments.